Happy Wednesday. Good morning, PASW staff clients. We have our friends joining us for our advanced class. This is when we really take a big bite out of what's going on musically. You know, last week we looked at Chopin, just pretty much that one piece, that mazurka, and it's really fun to dive deeper in without getting too, we want to keep it simple, but not superficial. How do we do that? And today, your film scoring results are in for Big Night. Can't wait to show you that. That's going to be a very groovy scene. I think we should take a field trip in a car like that and reenact the scene with, of course, no smoking, but reenact the smiles and all that stuff. And then I know this was kind of a far out kind of idea. And Miles Davis / Gil Evans, because that's who we're going to look at today, and Steve Reich. What could those guys possibly have in common? Because if you've been paying attention, you know that Steve Reich was influenced by jazz, but I've never heard him talk about Miles Davis or Gil Evans. He talks about John Coltrane a lot, but that's more of the harder jazz. I've thought about this for years, like I've said, and I've been wanting to, let's explore it today, because there's a piece that Gil Evans did in 1960. So we need to review with how Miles and Gil started. We also need to review with Steve Reich. What is he doing? So we're gonna explore together about what he's doing. Okay, we know Miles was into cool jazz, late 50s, way different than bebop. They get into more modal playing, right? Based on modes. Is it more chord progressions? It's less chord progressions, right? 2 chords. How do you make 2 chords sound interesting without it? And today, actually, we're going to be looking at La Nevada is 1 chord. So you're like, great. Although it's got major and minor stuff, so maybe 2 chords. But this is, and we're also going to make a little parallel to painting, because what Gil Evans is doing in the studio is what most bands probably do in the studio, where they're just kind of sketches. But then usually you record and rehearse up to a song. He's not really doing that. He's keeping it sketch-like, and you'll hear what I'm talking about when we get to La Nevada, which is a nice Spanish snow following, and it sounds like that, snow falling. So Evans, Canadian-born jazz pianist, right? Mostly arranger, though. That's what people really like him for, his arranging, because he colors the instruments in an unusual way, many times using classical instruments. French horn, tuba. You wouldn't use that in a jazz band. That's kind of square, right? That's for the symphony orchestra. That's for kids. But here with cool jazz, using some of these classical instruments makes it sound cool. Who does this later? George Martin does this a few years later with 4 Lads from Liverpool. He'll take in classical instruments into the studio and say, now that was with popular music. This is a little bit different, but Gil Evans is using classical instruments in a jazz band, so very much like George Martin, actually. So Gil Evans was a band leader, arranger, and a brilliant orchestrator. Did a lot of Jimi Hendrix stuff too, which is kind of his later period. So in 1960, he comes out with Out of the Cool, which is the album. 1960, what's going on? Is Bach? No, Bach's not, no. Okay, Scott Johnson, no, he's not there. Let's see, we have to go through our timeline of how do we get up to that. I mean, it's jazz. 1960, the Beatles are rehearsing, right? I mean, they're playing like hell, getting their sound, but they're not on the scene yet. If it's 1960, it's early rock and roll, right? Easy listening as well, too. I mean, Elvis is probably the biggest in 1960, but you still have Theme from a Summer Place, the Max Steiner song. I mean, and this is that kind of Americana sound that we've been talking about. That's number 1. Gil Evans is not going to sound anything like this. He's going to do something very new in the studio. So we'll listen to a few times, and then I'll be talking in through it. It starts off with just piano, okay? Kind of cool. And then there's a motif. There's a repeating motif, just like Steve Reich does it. You hear that? That rhythm is going to be very much like Steve Reich. And this is process music. This is music that's gradual and that's evolving slowly. That's the idea too. It's not to get to the place. It's to experience the music, right? It's not like, okay, rehearse and tell me what the song is. That's not the idea of it. This is just a different way of looking at art. This is come on and be part of the evolution with us as we grow through these kind of things. And it's not just classical and jazz, bands start doing this too in the studios. So you're part of the process. It's inviting you in. So if we just start with the piano, that's fine. Is it a solo piano? No. What do you hear? You hear maracas. That's Elvin Jones playing maracas. Steve Reich uses maracas. You have the repetitive rhythm that's going to be constant, right? You also have dissonance. Stravinsky, right? He had used a lot of dissonance, but it wasn't just noise banging on the piano. It was concise dissonance. Gil Evans is using that cluster. It's a cluster, and but it sounds, you're in G minor, so it sounds G minor with with that added fourth, which is what Bernstein would use for West Side Story. So it's repeating, and you're like, how long is this going to go on? So this to me sounds like very early minimalism music, where you're starting with an idea and you keep doing that idea. And it's almost like the listeners are like, when are you going to get to the hook? But this is all part of the process. This is all process music. And then you hear the guitar and the bass kind of come in. It's like everyone's kind of showing up at the studio together. And, oh, we're playing this. Okay, well, let me start just, we'll start getting into the groove here. He's got a jazz big band, but obviously he's not starting out with a big bang. He's going to evolve that. It's going to take a few minutes. It's got a cool little vibe going right here, though, right? Then here you hear, what do you hear? You hear flutes. Flutes, what are flutes doing? That's a classical instrument with muted trumpets. And of course, Gil Evans and Miles Davis have, they're using the harmon mute in a way that Miles is playing it where no other trumpet player was playing that. You hear Miles' sound with the harmon mute. Now this isn't Miles on the recording, but these are trumpet players. It's a trumpet player with a harmon mute and flutes. And that harmony sound, that minor 7, minor 9, very fresh sounding harmony. Now we're going to the root 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th. The chords are becoming grander. Steve Reich does that too, where there's only like 11 chord progressions in Music for 18 Musicians, like we talked about. And it doesn't sound like 1 to the 4 chord to the 5 chord. It doesn't sound like rock and roll or ragtime at all. It almost creeps up on you. This is what we're talking about with music evolving and minimalism changing all the time. Gradually we're getting stronger because now just like the vibraphone in Music for 18 Musicians that signals the change. Remember we saw that yesterday, and they go into the new section. Well, Gil Evans is doing that with the piano. Now we're getting lower here, and then listen to this. This is the next idea. But it just sounds like he's improvising, right? But he's not. He's actually laying the foundation for the next section, the next idea coming up. And then when the trombones take over, it's really cooking. Builds and builds and builds until here, then we're soloing here. So every person starts soloing on this one chord. Way different than bebop 10 years ago. You don't do one chord at all. But this is more of the modal thing that they're interested in, exploring that one chord, but sounding fresh and cool. So he's stripping down music. Miles and Gil Evans were stripping down music in a way that the minimalists stripped down classical music, but loved jazz and popular music. It's this whole stripping down of things that's interesting because, prior to that, music was getting more and more complex and more harder to listen to for the common ear, at least for my common ear. It was more complicated, and then it's like we need to just, okay, start over. You start maracas, you start piano, you start bass, and let's just start grooving here. And that's what this song is doing. Gil Evans is coming into the studio like a painter. What art's going on 50s, 60s? Abstract expressionism, right? We haven't talked too much about that, but I mean, that's Mark Rothko's going on, Jackson Pollock. Those are names that, you know, in art that you guys know. He's very much coming into the studio like an artist would, like a painter would just throw things here. And you're like, well, what are these little things here? What are these little, you're just making a mess. What that color doesn't, what are you trying to, what's the big picture here? Just tell me what we're doing. Well, that's not the whole point, right? So he's coming in and saying, you do the maracas, okay? And then you're gonna do the bass, and then I'm over here controlling it, but it's coming together like an abstract painting. And then at the end of it, is it a clear picture of a perfect sunset? No, it's not. It's so, it's enriching because you've moved along into the process with the artist, so you almost feel like you're part of the work of art because you're together feeling this thing together, as opposed to a finished, you know, pie in the sky, you know, of something that's final. It's not. It's evolving all the time. So I think Gil Evans is using the music studio as a painter would use his painting studio. So I thought we'd just listen to that great little tune. If it's a tune, yeah, I mean, it's an arrangement, but it's a living, breathing work of art, right? So hope you like that. That's La Nevada. And yeah, it's a pleasure talking about these things with you, just talking about a piece. Very cool. So tomorrow, yes, we'll go back to the town we all love with something very fun. Okay, have a great rest of the day. Thanks for going along this journey with me. This is very good, at least for us to do some good workshop thinking work during the week. These are thinking classes. These are classes that have a lot of unanswered questions, and that's part of the fun of it. So thanks a lot, and see you tomorrow.